The vast tundra of deep Siberia has a little known yet impressive heritage. This corner where Russia and the United States meet is home to an obscure language family that is on the verge of extinction. The ancient and enigmatic languages of this family, known as Paleo-Siberian, are spoken by small indigenous groups scattered across the region. The Paleo-Siberian languages are divided into four main branches: Chukotko-Kamchatkan, Yeniseian, Nivk, and Yukagir. However, we must understand that these branches are not genetically related to each other. Unlike Turkic, Slavic, or Semitic languages, the Paleo-Siberian language family indicates a geographical grouping of languages rather than a genetic bond. So the main purpose of creating this language family lies in its practicality for grouping several endangered language families in deep Siberia. Chukotko-Kamchatkan, Yeniseian, Nivk, and Yukagir are each isolate families, meaning they are not related to any other language family. However, I want to clarify that the languages within these individual isolate families are genetically related. For example, the Chukchi and Koryak languages of the Chukotko-Kamchatkan family are related and share the same ancestry. However, these two languages do not share a genetic bond with, for example, the Ket language from the Yeniseian family. This case reminds me of the Caucasian languages, which are also grouped geographically. Languages from different families such as Azerbaijani, Georgian, Armenian, and Kalmyk are often included in the broader Caucasian category. The Paleo-Siberian family is quite endangered. In fact, it wouldn't be wrong to say that it is on the verge of extinction. Paleo-Siberian languages are almost exclusively spoken in Russia. Today, presumably, this language family has fewer than 23,000 speakers, and this population is shrinking day by day. Currently, the approximate distribution of the Paleo-Siberian languages and peoples is like this. When I dug a little deeper, I also found some old maps showing the ethnic composition of the region. For example, in the 16th century, the region's ethnic mixture looked like this. Here we can still see the Chukchi, Koryak, Alutor, Italman, Nivk, and Yukagir presence. Fast forwarding to 1890, this is how these lands looked during the Russian imperial era. We see that the Paleo-Siberian people still had a strong presence here. Unfortunately, I could not find an ethno-linguistic map for this region that predates the 1500s. However, archaeological and linguistic studies show that the Paleo-Siberians have been living here at the edge of Asia for thousands of years. Spoken chiefly in the Chukotka Autonomous Okrug, which is the easternmost federal subject of Russia, Chukchi is the Paleo-Siberian language with most speakers. It is the language of the Chukchi people, who are one of Russia's officially recognized 47 minority peoples of North Siberia and the far east of Russia. Today, there are 16,228 Chukchi people recorded in Russia, 8,526 of whom speak Chukchi, which makes it about 52% of the population. Chukchi has been spoken in these lands for thousands of years. The Chukchi people are thought to be a part of the broader group of Paleo-Siberian peoples, which includes several ethno-linguistic groups that are not related to the larger Uralic, Altaic, or Indo-European families. The ancestors of these Paleo-Siberian peoples likely migrated into the region thousands of years ago. The Chukchi have traditionally been semi-nomadic, with livelihoods based on hunting, fishing, and reindeer herding. Historically, they lived in a harsh Arctic environment, which helped shape their culture and social organization. They traditionally lived in yarangas, large portable tent-like dwellings made of reindeer hides over a wooden frame. They are divided into two main groups: the reindeer Chukchi, who focus on reindeer herding, and maritime Chukchi, who are more focused on fishing and hunting sea mammals. Traditional Chukchi religion revolves around animism, with a strong belief in spirits and deities of nature such as those of the sea, sky, and animals. The Chukchi shamans played an important role in their society, communicating with the spirit world to ensure the well-being of their community. The shamans use rituals, dances, and songs to maintain harmony with the natural world. The Chukchi were known to have had contact with various neighboring groups, including the Evenks, Aleuts, and Russians, but they have maintained much of their traditional lifestyle and language. Historically, they fiercely resisted Russian expansion, maintaining their independence longer than any other Siberian group. The Russians had such a hard time bringing the Chukchi under their rule that by the late 1700s they had decided to abandon their frontier fort and sign a peace treaty with the Chukchi. However, with the Soviet era, just like all of the indigenous groups of Siberia, the Chukchi were forced to adapt to the Soviet system and follow a settled lifestyle. The Chukchi people are one of the many unfortunate examples of how Soviet influence had a destructive impact of the indigenous cultures of Siberia. The Chukotka region, rich in underground minerals and gold, was industrialized by the Soviet regime. This region alone provided 40% of the country's annual gold production. However, all the mining and other industrial activities caused significant climate change, pollution, and destruction of the flora and fauna. The Chukchi people, having their traditional ways of life on the brink of collapse, were confined to work as laborers under bad conditions.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
As a result of the nuclear tests conducted in the 1950s and 60s in the far north, the radiation and heavy metals caused severe health issues among the Chukchi people. Back then, when the average infant death rate was 15 out of every 1,000 in the Soviet Union, among the Chukchi it was between 80 to 100. The Chukchi language has a rich consonant system. It is an agglutinative language, meaning that words are formed by adding multiple affixes to a root, each conveying a specific grammatical meaning. This leads to long, complex word forms. Since my native tongue is Turkish, I am quite familiar with this. Chukchi has a system of 9 cases used for marking syntactic relationships between words, such as nominative, accusative, genitive, and others. Perhaps the most interesting feature of Chukchi is the lexical distinction based on gender. This is not really like the genders in, say, Romance languages. For example, in Portuguese, thank you is obrigado for men and obrigada for women. This way I send my love and respect to the Portuguese-speaking audience of this channel. However, Chukchi takes it even further. Certain words in this language have a consonant change between R and T depending on the gender of the person. Some examples would be, for the word finally, man would say kanvar, woman would say kanvet. For the word maybe, man would say velar, woman would say velet. For the word suddenly, man would say lur and woman would say lut. Also, in one of the Chukchi dialects, it was recorded that man say a for thank you and woman say e. It is always quite interesting to see how languages end up developing these unique features throughout history. I tried to find how this gender-based dialect difference developed in Chukchi. However, I unfortunately couldn't find much. I guess sometimes there is no solid explanation. These linguistic features develop over a long time in remote societies. Historically, Chukchi has been an oral language. One thing that makes Chukchi unique is that it is one of the few languages to have autonomously created its own script. In the late 1920s, Russian anthropologist Vladimir Bogaraz discovered something quite fascinating during an expedition to Chukotka. He met a Chukchi reindeer herder named Tenevil who had independently created a pictographic writing script for the Chukchi language. This script consisted of symbols that represented sounds or words. Here we see some specimens from Tenevil's notes. For example, these symbols from 1 to 8 represent nouns like father, mother, son, deer, and sealskin. Symbols from 9 to 17 represent adjectives like small, poor, rich, and good. Symbols from 25 to 33 represent verbs like to eat, to do, to become, to live, and such. Symbols from 49 onward represent gadgets from daily life such as candle, plate, spoon, teapot, milk, pipe, and cigarette. For someone with no formal linguistics training, this is extremely impressive work. However, this script was never widely adopted and it remained an individual project. It's not really known why Tenevil created this script, but the most common assumption was to find a way to communicate with his children who supposedly lived elsewhere. It's not exactly known when, but presumably Tenevil died in the 1940s. This short-lived script also died with him. Today he is remembered with a unique legacy. In 1931, the first official script for Chukchi based on the Latin alphabet was created by Vladimir Bogaraz. It looked like this. In 1937, across the Soviet Union, all alphabets used by the non-Slavic people in the country were replaced with Cyrillic ones. The same applied to Chukchi, and it is still used today. According to the 2016 data, 1,616 students studied the Chukchi language in 28 different schools in Russia's Chukotka autonomous region. Actually, this is not a bad number considering that there were only 57 students studying the Siberian Yupik language and 107 students studying the Avan language in this region. Today, the Krayny Sever, which is the oldest newspaper in the Chukotka Autonomous Region, publishes news in the Chukchi language in addition to Russian. Here is how written Chukchi looks. You can see all the additional letters in this language that are not used in Russian. Weekly publications in Chukchi are quite important to preserve this language. Also, it is worth mentioning that the circulation of this newspaper is around 6,000 copies weekly. In the 1959 Soviet census, 11,727 Chukchi people were recorded, 94% of whom spoke Chukchi. In 1989, although the Chukchi population was recorded as 15,107, 70.4% of them spoke the language. In 2021, the percentage of the Chukchi people who spoke their ancestral language was marked at 52%. Chukchi is written in the Cyrillic script. 8,526 people speak this language. It belongs to the Chukotko-Kamchatkan branch of the Paleo-Siberian languages. The status of Chukchi is definitely endangered, and here is how Chukchi sounds. We're continuing with the second most spoken Paleo-Siberian language, Koryak. Spoken by the Koryak ethnic group in Far East Russia's Koryak region, this language is a close relative to Chukchi. Anthropologically, the Koryaks, along with the Chukchi and other groups mentioned in this video, belong to the Mongoloid North Asian race. They are generally short and sturdy with dark skin. Their facial features include broad flat faces, low-set noses, prominent cheekbones, and distinct Mongolian eye folds. They have dark eyes and hair. Additionally, men usually have little to no facial hair. The 2021 population census in Russia recorded 7,498 Koryaks, 4,164 of whom spoke the Koryak language. This means that 55% of the Koryaks speak their ancestral language. Compared to Chukchi, which has two main dialects, Koryak is more diverse with 7 dialects. The Koryak culture is deeply rooted in their connection to the harsh environment of Kamchatka. Traditionally, their way of life was split between reindeer herding and coastal fishing, with the inland Koryaks focused on raising reindeer for transportation, clothing, and food, while the coastal Koryaks relied heavily on fishing, hunting sea mammals, and gathering. Their nomadic lifestyle involved moving between seasonal camps and living in yarangas. The Koryak people practice animism, believing that spirits inhabit nature, including animals, trees, and rivers. This belief is central to their shamanistic practices, where shamans act as spiritual leaders and healers. The Koryaks view the world as interconnected, with spirits present in all elements, animals, plants, objects, and geographical features. Spiritual balance is maintained through rituals, offerings, and prayers. Kuikin Naku, the Big Raven, a central figure in Koryak mythology, is a hero who shaped the world and taught essential human skills. Shamans serve as intermediaries, communicating with spirits through rituals and trances to ensure the community's well-being. We can see very similar practices among the rest of the communities in the area. Koryak art and crafts often reflect their environment, with intricate carvings, beadwork, and woven materials used in clothing, tools, and ceremonial items. While traditional practices still hold importance, many Koryaks now live in villages and have adopted elements of modern Russian life. However, they continue to maintain a strong cultural identity, especially through language, storytelling, music, and dance. Have you noticed one thing? I cannot be the only one who has noticed that. This dance, traditional clothes, and singing strongly resemble the North American native cultures. Genetic studies indicate that over millennia, migrations occurred across the Bering Strait, resulting in the presence of certain Native American genetic markers within Kamchatka communities and vice versa. While these genetic findings are compelling, linguistic evidence supporting a direct ancestral link remains inconclusive and subject to ongoing debate. For instance, the Dene-Yeniseian hypothesis proposes a relationship between Siberia's Yeniseian languages and North America's Na-Dene languages. Although some researchers find morphological and phonological similarities encouraging, many linguists remain cautious, noting that the observed sound correspondences and shared vocabulary do not meet the stringent criteria required by the comparative method. Consequently, while evidence of ancient interactions and migrations exists, it does not definitely establish that the languages, or by extension the cultures, are genetically related in a manner that would enable the reconstruction of a common ancestral language or culture for both regions. Just like Chukchi, Koryak was first written with the Latin script in 1931. However, in 1937, the Cyrillic script was officially adopted. Koryak is an agglutinative language. In Koryak, nouns have different forms for singular, dual, and plural, but this distinction only appears in the basic form of the word. When nouns take different case endings, like for position or direction, the number is no longer marked. For example, the word Gwinika can mean an animal, two animals, or many animals depending on the context, because the case endings do not show whether it is singular, dual, or plural. In the 1959 Soviet census, 6,287 Koryak people were recorded, 90.5% of whom spoke Koryak. In 1899, 9,242 Koryaks were recorded, 52% of whom spoke Koryak. And in 2021, 52% of the 7,484 Koryaks spoke their ancestral language. Koryak is written in the Cyrillic script. 4,164 people speak this language. It belongs to the Chukotko-Kamchatkan branch. The status of Koryak is severely endangered, and it sounds like this.
Kami nga to amang anya wene pula koya galanga ke alia chatan bang diknganot annangai chiche na ko we kanyola konpong ko we nyanyola na to.
Now we're going a little south towards Sakhalin Island. The Nivk language is one of the most mysterious and unique languages in the world. Spoken by the Nivk people, an indigenous group living on Sakhalin Island and along the Amur River in Russia's Far East, it is classified as a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives. I think it is worth mentioning once more that Paleo-Siberian is not a genetic grouping of languages, but a geographical one. So when we categorize Nivk under this group, it is only for practical reasons. Nivk features complex consonant clusters, agglutinative grammar, and an interesting system of verb incorporation, where entire words can merge into verbs to modify their meaning. It has no grammatical genders. Historically, Nivk was influenced by Tungusic, Mongolic, and later Russian, which resulted in the borrowing of certain loanwords from these languages. The Nivk language and people are also known by the name Gilyak. The 2021 Russian census suggests that there are 3,863 Nivk, 1,277 of whom speak the Nivk language. Anthropologically, the Nivk people are classified within the Sakhalin-Amur subgroup of the Mongoloid racial type. They are generally short in stature, with men averaging around 160 centimeters in height. Their physical features include a broad and flat face. Unlike many other Mongoloid groups, they have relatively darker skin along with darker eyes and hair. One distinctive trait is their notably dense beards, which some researchers suggest may be influenced by contact with the Ainu. The origins of the Nivk people are thought to trace back to ancient Siberian populations, with both linguistic and genetic evidence supporting the idea that they have inhabited the region for millennia. They are believed to be the descendants of some of the earliest Neolithic groups that settled along the lower Amur River and Sakhalin Island, marking a long history of adaptation and continuity in this remote part of the world. Traditionally, the Nivk were hunter-gatherers, relying on fishing, hunting sea mammals, and gathering wild plants for food. They had a strong spiritual connection to nature, with animistic beliefs centered on the spirits of animals and natural forces. Their society was traditionally organized around kinship groups, and they crafted advanced tools for hunting and fishing. Over time, their way of life was shaped by interactions with Russian settlers, with many adopting Russian customs, though their cultural traditions, including shamanism and seasonal ceremonies, continue to thrive in various forms. Today, a newspaper named Nivktiv, meaning Nivkvord, is published in the Sakhalin region. It is the only newspaper in Nivk, and it looks like this. What you see here is the most recent copy of this newspaper on the internet. It also shows how written Nivk looks. In the 1959 Soviet census, 4,076 Nivk people were recorded, 99.6% of whom spoke Nivk. In 1989, 4,623 Nivks were recorded, 24% of whom spoke Nivk. And in 2021, 32% of the 3,863 Nivks spoke their ancestral language. Nivk is written in the Cyrillic script. 1,277 people speak this language. It belongs to the Nivk branch. The status of Nivk is critically endangered, and it sounds like this.
Pi machkingan huif furinet, umkukun alsngat vitkun, vita klaita hatun, uifatuk als namakus patshars, nevatuk hakishk als ravst. Sakakishk raustra, tenjelung sig kengrat hangan, sapra als namakus patnet, sapra als pruch punet.
The Italman language, also known as Kamchadal, is spoken on the western coast of the Kamchatka Peninsula by the Italman people. Historically, Italman was spoken across much of Kamchatka, but due to centuries of Russian influence, colonization, and assimilation policies, the number of speakers has drastically declined. Today, only a small number of mostly elderly Italman still speak the language fluently, while younger generations primarily use Russian. Italman is a member of the Chukotka-Kamchatkan language family, however it is the only surviving language of the Kamchatkan subdivision. As of 2021, the Italman population in Russia is around 2,622, 808 of whom are recorded to speak Italman. However, please note that not all 808 of these people speak Italman as a native language. The level of proficiency varies, and it would be a safer assumption to say that 10 to 20% of the ethnic populations that are shown in this video actually speak these languages at a native level. One of the most interesting things about Italman is how its words are built. Instead of using separate words for things like tense or direction, Italman often combines many small morphemes into a single long word. A whole sentence in English might be expressed as just one complex word in Italman. For example, let's start the study would be one long word in Italman. Yeah, I'm not even going to try pronouncing it. This feature makes the language much different from Russian and most European languages. The word order in Italman is also quite flexible because the endings of words show their roles in a sentence, such as whether something is the subject or object. Originally, Italman had no written form as it was passed down orally through storytelling and songs. In 1932, a writing script based on the Latin letters was created, and in 1937, the Cyrillic script was adopted. However, since Russian was heavily promoted in schools and daily life, most Italman children grew up speaking only Russian, leading to a steep decline in overall Italman fluency over time. Between the 1940s and 1980s, Italman writing was abolished. The current Italman alphabet was created in 1984 and has been used ever since. The Italmans are the indigenous people of Kamchatka, likely arriving from mainland Asia 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. Traditionally, they were skilled fishermen, fur hunters, and herbalists. Russian settlers arrived in the 18th century, subjecting the Italmans to economic and ideological pressures, heavy taxation, and forced labor. Uprisings were brutally suppressed, and diseases further devastated their population. Over time, the Italmans adopted Russian tools and customs. The Soviet era accelerated assimilation through collectivization, suppression of animism, and Russian language education, making Italman a home language only. In the 1959 Soviet census, 1,109 Italman people were recorded, 36% of whom spoke Italman. In 1989, 2,408 Italmans were recorded, 19.6% of whom spoke Italman. And in 2021, 30% of the 2,622 Italmans spoke their ancestral language. Italman is written in the Cyrillic script. 808 people speak this language. It belongs to the Chukotka-Kamchatkan branch. The status of Italman is critically endangered. Yukagir is a nearly extinct language spoken by the Yukagir people in northeastern Siberia. It is divided into two mutually unintelligible dialects, Tundra Yukagir and Forest Yukagir. It is worth mentioning that some sources mention Yukagir as a small language family and Tundra and Forest Yukagir variants as separate languages. In Russian and Soviet censuses, tundra and forest Yukagirs were recorded together under the name Yukagir, so we don't really know about the numbers for these two groups individually. As of 2021, the Yukagir population in Russia is 1,802, 516 of whom speak tundra or forest Yukagir. However, the common assumption claims that 516 is quite an optimistic number, and in reality, around 50 people speak forest Yukagir and 75 speak tundra Yukagir. Historically, Yukagir speakers were more widespread, but language shift to Russian and Yakut has drastically reduced the number of speakers, leaving only a few dozen fluent speakers today. Linguistically, Yukagir is considered a language isolate, though some researchers suggest a distinct connection to the Uralic languages. Yukagir has an agglutinative morphology with extensive case marking, vowel harmony, and a complex system of evidentiality. Evidentiality in Yukagir refers to grammatical markers that indicate the source of speaker's knowledge or the degree of certainty regarding a statement. These markers distinguish whether information is obtained firsthand, inferred from evidence, or reported by someone else. For example, different suffixes or verb forms specify whether the speaker directly witnessed an event, deduced it from indirect clues, or heard about it from another source. This system plays a crucial role in how information is conveyed, emphasizing the reliability and origin of statements. The forest Yukagir's ancestors were hunters and fishermen who moved around to find food. Until the 18th century, their main job was hunting wild reindeer. Hunting still remains important in the region today. The tundra Yukagir also valued hunting, but mostly used reindeer for transportation. They primarily used bows for hunting, which they continued to do until the 1920s because firearms were not reliable and ammunition was expensive. The Yukagirs also believed in respecting nature, only taking what they needed. Despite the influence of Russian culture, they kept their shamanistic traditions alive. They also had a social system where family lineage was traced through the mother, and after marriage, couple would live with the wife's family. Yukagir uses the Cyrillic script. Between 125 to 516 people speak tundra and forest Yukagir languages or dialects in total. These languages belong to the Yukagir family, and both tundra and forest Yukagir are categorized as critically endangered. Forest Yukagir sounds like this.
Metija jitanga mit kodang ila bustiyo metwa mololga metji akmit payoda kodik mit kunil ngojal worpa met imdal jaste wongojam tada kaje tang yukudor papo ge payoda kodik metji uluroga saganami tada tlel tang ma lukochwa chamulya la khayoda ana kaje ila.
And we are back to the Chukotko-Kamchatkan branch. Alyutor is closely related to Koryak, but is considered a separate language rather than a dialect. It is spoken by the Alyutor people in two small villages on the east coast of Kamchatka. Today, the Alyutor population in Russia is only 97, around 25 of whom speak the Alyutor language. Traditionally, the Alyutor people lived a semi-nomadic lifestyle. Their dwellings included portable yarangas when moving seasonally and wooden houses in more settled areas. However, during the Soviet era, many were forcibly settled into permanent villages as part of government policies aimed at assimilation, leading to a decline in their traditional way of life. You know, this is quite a similar story for many of the indigenous groups we have covered in this video. Their cultures, history, and spiritual practices show a lot of similarities, but there are also some interesting differences. If it sounds like this information gets too repetitive, it is because these groups are quite similar in many ways. Anyways, let's get back to our topic. Similar to the Chukchi language, Alyutor exhibits consistent pronunciation differences between men and women. Women use ts where men pronounce l or s, as seen in words like Palaku versus Putsaku, meaning footwear. Each gender's speech pattern is considered inappropriate for the other. Until the 1950s, Alyutor was considered a dialect of Koryak, therefore it never had a separate alphabet. Throughout history, it has mostly been an unwritten language. Today, Alyutor uses the Cyrillic script, however we can assume that only a few people write in this language, so the use of written Alyutor is quite limited. It is spoken by around 25 people. Alyutor belongs to the Chukotko-Kamchatkan branch. The status of it is critically endangered, however it is almost certain that Alyutor will become extinct in the following decades. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any recordings of the Alyutor language. The Ket language is the last surviving member of the Yeniseian language family, a group of languages once spoken across a wider area of Siberia. It is considered a linguistic isolate with no proven relatives in Eurasia. Ket is highly complex, particularly in its verb morphology, which includes intricate aspect, tense, and subject-object agreement systems. Ket is spoken by the Ket ethnic group. Today, there are around 1,000 Ket people in Russia, 153 of whom speak the Ket language. The Ket people are believed to be the descendants of the Yeniseian people, an ancient group that once inhabited a vast area of central Siberia, possibly extending far beyond their current homeland along the Yenisei River. The ancestors of the Ket people were gradually displaced or assimilated by expanding Turkic, Uralic, and Tungusic peoples over centuries. Some theories even propose that the Ket and other Yenisei-speaking peoples may have links to the prehistoric populations that migrated across the Bering Strait to North America, possibly connecting them to the Nadene-speaking indigenous groups such as the Navajo and Tlingit people in Canada and the United States. Anthropologically, the Ket people are classified as part of the North Asian Mongoloid race, though they also display certain Uralic characteristics. Their skin and eye color are lighter than most Mongoloid groups but darker than those of Uralic peoples. They have more prominent noses, minimal beard growth, and broad flat faces with high cheekbones. Generally, they are short. In 1843, Russian explorer Alexander von Middendorf gave the following description. In spite of their Mongoloid features, they look quite alike the Finns. The Ket language has a rich vocabulary related to hunting, flora, fauna, and weather. Borrowed words reflect historical contact with neighboring groups including Evenk, Turkic, and Samoyedic languages. For example, reindeer-related terms in Ket come from Samoyedic languages. Russian influence intensified in the 1930s when a writing system was influenced and major social reforms took place. Russian became the language of education, culture, and administration, gaining prestige at the expense of Ket. Today, Russian continues to dominate, further endangering the Ket language. Historically, the Ket were semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers and fishers living in small family-based communities. They navigated the Yenisei and its tributaries in dugout canoes, relying on fishing, hunting, and occasional trade with neighboring groups. Russian expansion into Siberia in the 17th century brought significant changes, including increased taxation, forced labor, and cultural assimilation. In the 1959 Soviet census, 1,016 Ket people were recorded, 77% of whom spoke Ket. In 1989, 1,113 Kets were recorded, 48% of whom spoke Ket. And in 2021, 15% of the 1,000 Kets speak their ancestral language. Ket uses the Cyrillic script. 153 people speak this language. It belongs to the Yeniseian family. The status of Ket is severely endangered. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find an audio recording of Ket being spoken. Now we're going to check out two Paleo-Siberian languages that are deemed to have gone extinct, but I beg to differ. Yug and Kedek are categorized as extinct, but practically they're still spoken, though by only 3 to 5 people. I don't know how to describe it, but seeing a language spoken by a few people makes me feel kind of emotional. I mean, imagine being one of the last members of your ethnic group and one of the last few people to speak your ancestral language. How would that feel? Yug language belongs to the Yeniseian branch and is spoken by the Yug people, who share the same ancestry as the Ket people. The 2021 Russian census documented only 7 Yug people and 3 Yug speakers across the country. Yes, realistically this language is going to become extinct, but as long as someone possesses knowledge of it, I personally do not see it as accurate to call Yug a dead language. The other language is Kedek, and as you might surmise, it is spoken by the Kedek people. It belongs to the Chukotko-Kamchatkan family. Today, there are 23 Kedek people in Russia, 4 of whom are recorded to speak Kedek. Well, my friends, it's been such a great pleasure to explore the forgotten indigenous groups and languages of the Russian Arctic. See you in the next video, and thanks for watching.